All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Nick. I'm the CEO at Casa. And at Casa, we're building the sovereign bank for Bitcoiners. And so today I want to make the final case for self-custody. I want to play a game to start us off here. And this game is called Name That Chart. The number is only going up and to the right. Could it be the Bitcoin price? No. It is the amount of Bitcoin in the BlackRock ETF. Over 1.3 million Bitcoin today is currently held in all of the ETFs, and all of that came since just the beginning of 2024. So that's 6% of Bitcoin's total supply that's held in the ETFs, held in a centralized issuer, right? And so just last month, there was this article in Bloomberg where they were talking about how BlackRock was actually helping OGs convert Bitcoin from their individual wallets that they've been holding for a decade plus into the ETF. And so I think what the traditional response to this would be is not your keys, not your coins. You should know better than giving up your keys to your Bitcoin. But the problem here is I think more and more people are starting to tune this out. More and more people don't really know necessarily what all the meaning is that's underneath not your keys, not your coins. And so I wanted to try and make the case in a different way. And I wanted to try and make the case in a way that could hopefully reach more people who might think about things a little bit differently. And so I'm going to make it three different ways: the economic case for self-custody, the technical case, and the historical case. So starting off with the economic case, I have to be the bearer of bad news here, but despite the fact that 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, most people invest in Bitcoin to earn more dollars or whatever fiat currency that you actually prefer here. So if you are buying Bitcoin today, you're usually buying Bitcoin because you've been told there's only 21 million Bitcoin. Buy now before all the supply is gone. And if you just buy now, you can ride this rocket to the moon, right? And so everything is around Bitcoin as the store of value. It's around Bitcoin as something where because there is only 21 million, it's going to help you protect yourself against inflation. So this really comes down to belief. Bitcoin's value is based on people believing that Bitcoin has value. And while a lot of people might stop there, there's really one layer below this, which is that the miners of Bitcoin need to believe that it has value. That's Jihan Wu, who's like a really old Bitcoin miner. If the miners don't believe that Bitcoin has value and they stop mining on the network, and basically there aren't enough people mining, bad things start to happen, just to put it really simply. So bad things start to happen, the network becomes less secure, number goes down. At a more nuanced level, this is how miners make money. And this is what shows kind of the amount of money that miners have made over time. It might look pretty familiar because it's basically the block reward, and you can see each halving where the block reward gets cut in half and goes down. And so the reward is made up of the block subsidy where new Bitcoin is created, and so that adds to the total Bitcoin supply, and then fees. And in this chart, you can see these little bumps along these flat parts, and the bumps are basically the only times when fees mattered. Those bumps are the fees that were added on top of the block subsidy, which was the new Bitcoin that's being created. And so there's very few bumps, as you can see. And so most of the Bitcoin that miners earn just comes from new Bitcoin being created and issued into the supply. If you zoom out, you see that the new Bitcoin that gets created as part of the supply drops to near zero shortly after 2040. And while that issuance curve keeps going until 2140, it drops to basically zero at 2040. So unless Bitcoin is worth millions of dollars per coin, when miners are earning, 0.05 Bitcoin per block that they mine, it's really not that great of an incentive. And so the system for Bitcoin was designed to transition from the block subsidy to transaction fees, paying miners and incentivizing them to keep mining on the network. How are we doing in this? Well, since the beginning of 2024, on-chain payments have basically been on this steady decline. And so this is a way of looking at how many transactions are happening on-chain that are actually people paying each other. And they've just been kind of ticking down since the launch of ETFs. So we're not on the right track to be replacing Bitcoin subsidy rewards out of the blocks with transaction fees. And Bitcoin was really meant to be the network was meant to be held at the edges, which means that all of these different wallets and nodes are meant to be interacting with each other and transacting each other in order to create robust network activity and to build up the transaction fees to incentivize the miners to continue securing the network. And when that doesn't happen, when you have ETFs, don't even try to understand this chart, but basically like all these arrows are showing how Bitcoin and ETF settlement works, and none of them really have to do with Bitcoin moving on chain. And so in this world where a bunch of Bitcoin goes into ETFs, there are very few on-chain transactions that are actually happening. And we run into this big problem where miners are not properly incentivized by transaction fees. We see this today in the number of fees that people are paying in order to get their Bitcoin blocks confirmed. They're the lowest in history. People are paying sub 1 sat per VByte, which is crazy. And so here we reach this catch-22, right? Because if we assume that this low transaction volume will continue, we need to find some way to incentivize miners. But the only way to really incentivize miners is to remove the 21 million supply cap on Bitcoin and continue to add to Bitcoin's inflation by issuing more Bitcoin with each block. And so this is the catch-22, because the whole time we've been telling people that you have to buy Bitcoin because there's only 21 million, and that's why you can keep it in the ETF and it's going to be valuable. But on the flip side, if you keep doing that, then you're actually going to destroy the value that has been built up in Bitcoin in the first place. And so if you don't care about this first sentence of the white paper here, which is about transacting without financial institutions, and you don't care about personal sovereignty, and so therefore you don't care about self-custody, maybe you will care about self-custody because you will make more dollars. Okay, so the second case is the technical case, and this isn't that technical, so follow along here, but in 2024, there were $9.4 billion worth of internet crime that was reported to the FBI that included cryptocurrency. And this is basically like a rocket ship up right in this graph since 2020, which is when they first started tracking this. So I was thinking about this and I was wondering, why is this the case? Why is crypto involved in so many transactions? It's over 50% of internet crime in 2024. And really, I think it comes down to one thing, which is that crypto transactions are irreversible. So transactions are on chain, cannot be reversed, whereas bank transactions can be reversed. And so when you have irreversible transactions, it's much more easy to steal money from people. Once the money is gone, it's gone. Whereas with a bank, all you got to do is just call your bank and they'll put it back in your account. So because we have had this ability to reverse transactions over time, we've allowed ourselves to build up weak authentication protocols with how we use our money online. And this is basically passwords. Passwords are nice because if you forget your password, you can just hit the forgot password button and then your bank lets you back in. And so in case somebody gets access to your bank account using your password, you just call your bank and they reverse the transaction. And so they haven't really needed this really strong form of authentication. But private keys, on the other hand, are the form of authentication for blockchains. That's because blockchains like Bitcoin are permissionless, anonymous networks. So you need a really strong form of authentication in order to prove that you own the money that you say you own. And really, the three reasons here, these three qualities of why private keys are so useful to authenticate you, is that they are unique, meaning that no two private keys are the same. They are unguessable, which means it's impossible for me or all the computers in the world to guess what your private key is. And then they're unforgeable, which means that you really can't fake that you have a private key when you don't actually have it. And so these make private keys an amazing form of digital authentication. And yet, exchanges keep trying to abstract away the private keys from their users. Why is that? Well, basically, they want to keep people comfy. They just want them to be able to use the forgot password button, because if you lose your private key, there's no forgot private key button. Your money's just gone. So when you do this, the Bitcoin network doesn't really know that it's you transacting. They just know that Coinbase is transacting, and then you have to trust Coinbase to properly authenticate you. And so you have to trust that Coinbase knows that it's actually you wanting to send your money and not some other attacker or hacker who is wanting to send that. And this is actually a really hard problem when you have irreversible transactions. And that's why Coinbase has set aside up to $400 million in potential losses from a customer data breach that they had, which is resulting in a ton of fraud where people are actually able to steal money through social engineering and phishing from people's Coinbase accounts. So to protect against using an imperfect form of authentication, what does Coinbase do? Well, they have, as you can see, they add all these different layers of authentication in here, which adds friction to you using your money, but helps them make sure that it's not somebody else trying to steal from you. So you've got a password, and then you've got 2FA, whitelisting addresses, time locks, video verification, all these things just to try and recreate what a private key gives you by default. You may think, well, Coinbase is going to figure this out. They've got enough resources, then in the meantime, nothing bad's going to happen to my money. That'll be an other people problem. Even in that world, you lose the fact that Bitcoin needs to be held at the edges to maintain its value. And so if Bitcoin is being transacted a lot from exchanges, you actually run into all this friction when you're trying to use your money. Your bank doesn't call you every time you try to send dollars to somebody, right? Well, it's because the bank transactions are reversible. In Bitcoin, you have to have a much stronger form of authentication in order to prove that somebody owns their money, and therefore private keys are that best method. And so the way that you could maybe figure out how to make this work and how to scale this up is you could say, well, let's just have Coinbase and Gemini and Kraken and all these other exchanges kind of create this second layer where you can maybe reverse transactions, you can keep fraudulent actors out, make sure that people don't lose all their money and all their private keys. And basically, you've just recreated the banking system. So the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that is the lesson of this section. Private keys are the only way to scale Bitcoin into many transactions that are necessary to keep the network healthy. And so the final case here is the historical case. And you may be thinking, well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions is a bit dramatic for the current situation that we're in. And I would say, no, that is not the case. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't really typically say dramatic things. And so this is going to show why that actually is a really big problem to just recreate the banking system by looking at the history of what the banking system has done to people. This is just a couple of recent articles, headlines from different countries all over the world where people have lost access to their bank accounts through failures of their fintech companies, through debanking because they didn't like what kind of industry you were in. And these are smaller scenarios that I think have gotten some attention but haven't really driven change in the way people behave. And so I wanted to look back for bigger examples throughout history, looking back over at the last 100 years and seeing what happened when there was mass confiscation of wealth by governments or banks. So this is going to be kind of a rapid fire run through of all these historical cases. In 1970, in the Bolshevik Revolution, they nationalized the banks, took everybody's gold, and used that to fund the communist government. In the 1930s and 40s, the Nazis went across Europe conquering things, and in order to fund their war efforts, they actually stole a bunch of gold from people. And the craziest story that I read about while looking into this was when the Nazis took over Czechoslovakia, they needed to steal some gold to continue funding their war. And Czechoslovakia owned about 45 tons of national reserves of gold. And the Nazis wanted to steal this. How did they do it? They just had the Czech bankers tell the Bank of International Settlements to send the gold from their national account at the Bank of England to the German Reichsbank. And the Bank of England was like, sure, we'll transfer this gold from your account over to the Germans, all of it. And that was how, with the telegram, the Germans stole all of the Czechs' gold national reserves. In 1933, we had Executive Order 6102, where they made it illegal for Americans to own gold, and they converted it to dollars at about $20 an ounce. A year later, they devalued the dollar by 60% to $35 an ounce, convenient timing. In 1982, Mexico nationalized all of the banks during a currency crisis. They froze foreign currency deposits worth about 12 billion. And if you wanted to withdraw any of your money out of a foreign currency account, you had to convert it into pesos, which were going through hyperinflation at the time. In 1985, Peru forced all dollar accounts to be converted into the Peruvian currency, also going through hyperinflation. In 1990, Brazil froze all bank deposits above a small limit. It was about 80% of the country's total reserves, $115 billion. And those accounts weren't actually opened up again until over a year later. 2001, here in Argentina, there was the corralito. All the bank accounts were frozen. They only allowed people to withdraw 250 pesos a week. And at one point, they actually forcibly converted everybody's dollars into pesos at a rate that was less than half of the actual exchange rate. 2009, North Korea redenominated the currency at a rate of 100 to 1, only allowing people to exchange 100,000 won or less per person. So they lost a bunch of their net worth. 2013, Cyprus had two major banks fail, and the EU actually made depositors convert any amounts over 100,000 euros into equity in the bank. So you were basically forced to buy shares in the bank that was failing with your money above 100,000 euros. There's the Lebanese banking crisis, which has been ongoing since 2019. They froze US dollars accounts in 2019, and people still don't have access to their US dollar accounts that were frozen. And then finally, and this is, taking it down like to a slightly lower level, but Silicon Valley Bank almost collapsed in 2023 in the US. And the US government only stopped the bank run by ensuring deposits above the normal kind of 250K limit under a systemic risk measure. And so the reason that I bring this one in at the end here is to show that this isn't over. It just keeps happening, right? No matter what country you are, whether you're in the richest country in the world or you're in, a small country somewhere else, around the world, globally, every time there's financial stress, banks and governments take a step in, and that ends up harming individual people's money. And all this really boils down to the principal agent problem, right? And the principal agent problem means that you have to give your money to the bank and you have to trust them to do what you want, even though they're the ones in control of the money. The fact is that only you care about protecting your own money. And the buff Bitcoiner version of Smokey the Bear is here to tell you that you need to protect your own money because the banks aren't going to do it for you. Protecting your own money used to look like this, which was really a pain, right? This is why we had banks in the first place. You have physical money, and you can't protect that yourself. It's just very impractical and gives you a very, very bad night of sleep. But now you can protect millions of dollars, millions of Bitcoin, all in the palm of your hand with a phone, a thumb drive, or even a calculator. So why wait to take control of your money, to take control of your own keys, when this is easier than ever in history? And so if you do take control of your own keys, you will make more money, you'll have less friction when you use that money, and you'll be more secure with that money. And then finally, you will never again have to be at the whims of somebody else who controls your money and doesn't have your best interests at heart. Self-custody as a technology is something that can completely change the world because it gives people actual control over something that matters the most to them, right? And so this is something that we as a community have the opportunity to drive change with and to make sure that all of these problems that have happened throughout the world don't happen again. So let's not waste that opportunity. If you want to join the sovereign bank, you can reach us at casa.io. We'll help you hold your own keys without having to worry about losing a key and losing all of your money. And you can also follow me on X at Neuman. Thank you all. And I'll be around the conference if anybody wants to talk.